There has become a thing that's gone on, it seems like in this, especially this last year, ideology is more important than art.
Way more, certainly to the awards.
Yeah. And it's just, it's like, ideology trumps art. Ideology trumps individual effort. Ideology trumps good. Ideology trumps entertaining. You couldn't say shit if you had a mouthful, all right? And every bestseller, every play that was turned into a movie, if there was anything cool about it or anything, that's all going to be drained out of the movie. It's going to be weaned out of the movie. It's just the way it is.
Every best-selling novel, every stage play that makes it to the big screen, if there's even a hint of something provocative, it gets scrubbed, watered down, and sanitized. That's the reality of today's entertainment industry. Quentin Tarantino lit a fire under modern Hollywood during a raw, no-holds-barred interview with the always outspoken Bill Maher. The legendary director didn't hold back, ripping into his harshest critics and slamming them as self-righteous virtue signalers and phony advocates of woke culture. Maher, never one to bite his tongue, shot back with his signature sharp wit, keeping the conversation fiery and electric. For anyone hungry for bold, unfiltered takes on the state of Hollywood, this was essential viewing.
Before we run out of time, I have to say to you, besides the great entertainment, I have always really appreciated the way you pushed back when anyone tried to stifle you, shut you up, shame you, bully you. They tried it with the last one, with Once Upon a Time in the Hollywood, some bullshit about Margot Robbie doesn't have enough lines. And you do what I wish other people would do. Instead of apologizing like a little you say, I don't agree with your assessment.
Bill Maher has never hidden his disdain for Hollywood's obsession with woke narratives. He's said it time and again, an industry once driven by rich storytelling has traded depth for hashtags, swapping meaningful character arcs for shallow virtue signals. But even through the ideological fog hanging over Tinseltown, a few voices still break through. Quentin Tarantino is one of the clearest and loudest. Even Maher, one of Hollywood's fiercest critics, has deep respect for him. Why? Because Tarantino is unapologetically, stubbornly old school. He doesn't chase trends, doesn't preach from the director's chair, and refuses to be swept up in the tide of performative progressivism. Tarantino is here to make bold, boundary-pushing films that challenge audiences, not coddle them in such a sentiment. An era where most filmmakers play it safe. He tosses the rulebook and writes his own. It's daring, it's different, and it's exactly what the industry needs.
It's become a thing that's gone on, it seems like in this, especially this last year, ideology is more important than art.
Way more, certainly to the awards.
Yeah. And it's just, it's like, ideology trumps art. Ideology trumps individual effort. Ideology trumps good. Ideology trumps entertaining.
There's two kinds of movies, virtue signalers and superhero movies.
This is exactly why Bill Maher holds Quentin Tarantino in such high esteem. He's one of the few voices on the left with the courage to call out the absurdities within his own camp. Tarantino doesn't tiptoe around uncomfortable truths, and Maher sees that kind of raw honesty as increasingly rare in today's Hollywood. We've all seen the industry drift away from imagination and storytelling, choosing instead to anchor itself in rigid ideology and hollow displays of virtue. One of the most glaring examples, the ill-fated Snow White reboot, a disaster both critically and commercially. Why? Because the creative team prioritized political messaging over compelling storytelling. In an awkward attempt to avoid offense, they ditched the iconic Seven Dwarves in favor of CGI stand-ins, sidestepping the opportunity to cast real little people actors, performers who have long taken pride in those roles. What was framed as progress came off as patronizing. That kind of performative pandering is exactly what Tarantino and Maher push back against. And in an industry often afraid to offend, their refusal to play along is both refreshing and necessary.
Bullish on the future of movies? Because
well, look, you have to always look at it.
Are we going to get back to that place?
Look, this happened. This comes in waves. This absolutely comes in waves. All right, so it's like, okay, just looking at the 40s. All right, that was during the wartime, but that's also the time that you had film noir, where you actually, even though with the Hays Code, you had these dark, dark stories that were being told. But then after the war was won, then you had the 50s, which was the first of the completely homogenized decades, where you couldn't say shit if you had a mouthful, all right?
Let's pause for a moment, because Tarantino made a powerful observation that's worth highlighting. He brought up the Hays Code, the rigid set of moral guidelines Hollywood adopted in the 1930s to censor anything deemed too provocative, particularly when it came to sex and violence. At the time, many saw it as a direct attack on free expression and artistic freedom, a way to sanitize storytelling in the name of moral order. But here's the twist. Tarantino argues that censorship is back, not enforced by the government, or conservative watchdogs this time, but by a new breed of self-appointed cultural enforcers. Today's social justice crusaders and online outrage mobs have become the gatekeepers, using cancel culture as their tool of choice to silence dissent and punish creative risk. Art is no longer judged by its originality or craftsmanship, but by how closely it adheres to the latest ideological checklists. Directors second-guess themselves, writers self-censor, and studios fold under the pressure of social media firestorms. It's the Hays Code all over again, only now it's disguised as progress. And as Tarantino warns, it's every bit as suffocating and just as dangerous to creativity.
And the 60s, pretty much from like 1960 to 1966, was the 50s part 2. Right. But then what we think of as the 60s starts in about 67, and that's when New Hollywood comes out. Yeah. And that's an absolute positive response to the homogenized 50s.
So it's going to come back again.
Okay, and then it goes into the 70s, but then we went into the 80s.
All right.
And that's why you came up with Politically Incorrect, because that was the first, this is basically 80s part 2, what we're living through right now.
Well, I'll just take one more go at it. There's going to be a new golden age. Please be there and part of it.
Now here's something that really stands out. Tarantino believes Hollywood might finally be shaking off the grip of woke culture that's dominated it for years. And if he's right, all I can say is, thank God, because let's be honest, this era of performative progressivism hasn't just overstayed its welcome, it's become creatively stifling. Too many recent films feel more like lectures than stories, stripped of imagination, weighed down by political checklists, and drained of any real emotional impact. If the tide is truly turning, as Tarantino suggests, then bring it on. A creative revival centered on compelling characters, powerful storytelling, and genuine emotional depth, not hollow messaging, would be exactly the reset Hollywood needs. Imagine a return to cinema that moves us, surprises us, and challenges us without preaching. That's the kind of movie magic that drew us in to begin with. But during his sit-down with Joe Rogan, Tarantino also dropped a more sobering thought. One, that adds a deeper, more unsettling layer to the conversation. Take a look.
And then there's like, okay, this guy or this woman is going to write a think piece in the New Yorker about my movie, or in the Los Angeles Times, or in the New York Times, and they're going to write some think piece about it, or on this website or that website, and they're going to go against it and talk about, oh, this is a retrograde vision, or that this is a regressive vision, or Quentin has become right-wing, and this movie has a right-wing bent because of the way they, Quentin is identifying with Rick Dalton with hippies. That's how it's
Is that really a take that someone had, that you've become right-wing because of a character in a film?
Even like a critic who liked it, A.O. Scott, goes, well, this whole vision seems more on the right than you would imagine.
It might sound surprising, but this happens more often than you'd think. Many viewers, especially those on the political left, tend to assess films through a sharply ideological lens. The moment they sense even a hint of conservative themes or right-leaning ideas, the reaction can be intense. What was once just a movie suddenly becomes a perceived threat. Harsh criticism is directed not just at the film itself, but at everyone involved, from the actors to the writers, for daring to explore values that differ from their own. What's often lost in this kind of response is a fundamental truth. Cinema isn't meant to exist within a political echo chamber. Films are artistic reflections of society, its dreams, challenges, and contradictions. They're not designed to serve a single ideological agenda. Not every film will match your beliefs, and that's exactly what gives art its power. It challenges us, provokes thought, and yes, sometimes even offends. But dismissing a film solely because it doesn't align with your worldview is to miss the very point of what art is meant to do.
I mean, it doesn't necessarily make it wrong, make it bad, but it just seems like more on the right. Well, Rick is coming from a place more on the right, not me.
Yeah.
Per se, but I am telling the story through Rick's point of view. And then, they say something, well, how come they don't talk about, how come there aren't more black characters in the movie? How come they don't talk about the Vietnam War more? Well, basically, the movie takes place between 2 days. Okay, well, they didn't bump into Jim Brown, right, on those 2 days. All right, you know, they saw who they saw during those 2 days. Well, they didn't have a conversation about Vietnam in those 2 days.
It's long past time for social justice warriors and overly sensitive critics to understand a simple truth. Not every movie is meant to preach. Some films exist purely to entertain, to offer escape, fun, and enjoyment, and that's perfectly valid. Others choose to tackle serious, even controversial issues. Both kinds of films have a rightful place in the cinematic world, and not every story needs to shoulder the weight of a moral mission. What many seem to forget is that directors are storytellers, each with their own creative vision. That vision doesn't always reflect their personal beliefs. It's often about exploring different perspectives, characters, and experiences. When filmmakers are pressured to inject social or political agendas into narratives where they don't naturally belong, it's not progress, it's artistic sabotage. Forcing a movie to take on issues that conflict with its core theme dilutes its power and undermines its authenticity. The greatest films don't succeed because they lecture, they resonate because they tell compelling stories filled with emotion, humanity, and truth. Let art be art.
I think you're correct, and the thing about it though is, look, those kind of like academic college think pieces, they're just fine. Like in a college situation, they make sense. I can take a book or a movie and come up with some argument that goes, you know, that's like that's more of a subtextual argument about a film. That doesn't mean I'm right, but it means I can make my little argument,
right?
You know, for the course. But it doesn't. But I have no illusions that that's what the director was thinking about.
In the end, Tarantino's perspective feels like a breath of fresh air, a sharp reminder that true art isn't about pleasing everyone. It's about sparking thought, entertaining, and reflecting life in all its raw, messy complexity. He remains one of the rare voices in Hollywood who refuses to cave to ideological pressure, earning respect even from unlikely places, like Bill Maher. Whether he's calling out the excesses of woke culture or fiercely defending his creative freedom, Tarantino stands firm on one core belief: filmmakers must be free to tell their stories without fear of cancellation. Not every film needs a political message, and not every director should be judged through a rigid ideological lens. Hollywood might finally be waking up from its long performative slumber, and if this signals the start of a new era, one driven by bold, unapologetic storytelling, then count me in. Because art thrives in a space of free expression, not under the weight of purity tests and forced agendas. If Tarantino's right and Hollywood is shaking off its woke coma, we might just be on the edge of a true cinematic revival. No more lectures, no more formulaic virtue signaling, just great stories, told with passion and authenticity. If you're tired of the noise and ready for the real deal, hit that subscribe button and stay tuned. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. See you in the next one.